Hey, thanks for dropping in. On today's continuing series on soups, we're making what I consider to be the king of soups, French onion. And I'll share with you the two ingredients I use to take my French onion soup to the next level. Coming up next. I've always found it interesting how many of the foods we consider iconic today have really humble origins. Things like lobsters, oysters, and even caviar were originally eaten by the poor and the working class, not because they were luxurious, but because they were plentiful and cheap. Even entire dishes came about this way, such as paella, which farm laborers made out of whatever they could gather. French onion soup is certainly no exception. I mean, if you were a medieval peasant and you had access to onions and clean water, maybe some broth, maybe some wine, you were pretty much set. While the recipes evolved the last couple of hundred years, it always starts the same way, and that's with a ton of onions. We're using plain old yellow onions, which have a nice balance between onion bite and jammy sweetness once they're cooked down. You could switch it up and use a different type of onion or even combine varieties, but yellow onions are pretty much classic. To prep them, we start by lopping off the stem as well as a little triangular area of the root, which can be a little tough to break down. Once they're peeled, we slice them about a half centimeter thick, stem to root. Cutting it this way helps the onions hold together better, so that they don't dissolve completely into the broth. But they're not so big they're unwieldy to eat either. Okay, I'm going to finish up this last bit of prep, clean up a bit, and I'll see you at the stove. The first thing we need to do is sweat the onions and caramelize them. Thomas Keller, a Michelin-starred chef and one of my personal heroes, recommends doing this over a period of about 4 hours. We don't have that kind of time. Still, this is going to take a while, so keep your afternoon free. We'll start by dumping our onions into our pot, along with a good knob of butter and a bit of veg oil. The butter's for flavor, the veg oil will help prevent burning. We'll turn the heat on medium and let these come together. It's been about 10 minutes and our onions are wilting down nicely. They still have a long way to go, but for now we can turn the heat down a little bit. We'll keep a close eye on them and above all, stir frequently. If at any point you see the onions start to burn, or the fond, that's the sticky residue on the bottom of the pot, if that starts to burn, just add a splash of water to deglaze. That should take care of it. Also, as onions start getting softer and softer, you'll want to be careful not to break them up too much. Nobody wants to eat a bowl of onion mush. You want a little bit of texture. So instead of just mixing things around like it's a can of paint, try to get your spoon or your spatula underneath onions and fold them over instead. At this point, we can hit them with a bit of salt. That'll help draw more moisture out of them. Okay, this still has a ways to go. I'm going to keep at this, and we'll catch up again when these onions are ready. And we're back. It's been a little over an hour, and as you can see, our onions are nice and deeply browned. We can move on to the next step, and that's to deglaze a pot and pick up all those tasty brown bits stuck to the bottom. For that, you can use pretty much whatever alcohol you like. Common ones are sherry, wine, even whiskey. Us, we're going with a brandy, which, if you're a regular viewer, you'll know is my deglazer of choice. We only need about a quarter cup, and we'll let it cook off until most of it simmers off. Most of the brandy is gone, so now we can pour in our beef stock. Ideally, we'd have made our own. However, I'm using the old standby, better than bouillon. I've used a little stronger concentration than the label calls for. Plus, as I mentioned at the start of the video, I've got a couple of tricks that I think will help make up for not using homemade stock. We'll get to them momentarily. In addition to the stock, we'll also throw in a couple of sprigs of fresh thyme, as well as some bay leaves. We'll leave this to simmer for about 20 minutes. Alright, this soup is nearing its end stage. We can fish out the thyme and the bay leaves. And we'll add secret ingredient number 1, about 2 teaspoons of Maggi seasoning. If you've watched my previous videos, you might have seen me use this before. Maggi is basically liquid umami. Its main ingredient is MSG, which means it'll add a ton of meaty depth to our soup. Let's give this a taste. And season as required. That's good. Let's turn the heat down to low and prepare secret ingredient number 2. and that is unflavoured gelatin, which we're going to bloom, or hydrate, in a bit of water. I'm using 2 packets. You can use up to 3 for 6 cups of soup. We'll give this a couple of minutes to do its thing, not too long though, or it'll get too set. Our gelatin is bloomed, so let's add it to our pot. Now what this is going to do is thicken our soup slightly and give it that rich mouthfeel you get from homemade stock, which is often missing from store-bought stock. French onion soup should be a little bit decadent, and this is going to go a long way towards that. This only needs to simmer, not boil, for about a minute, and it's pretty much done. Let's move on to the last bit of work, and that's making the croutons. We'll start by laying some parchment down on our baking sheet. A little tip, if you crumple the parchment first, it makes it so much easier to spread it without it rolling back on itself. Onto this, we'll spread our bread cubes. This is just plain old store-bought baguette that I sliced into inch-thick cubes and tossed with some extra virgin olive oil and salt. We'll throw this into a 450-degree oven for 5 or 6 minutes, giving it a shake about halfway through so the croûtes toast evenly. Alright, we've reached the fun part of the show, and that is the assembly. We'll start with a couple of ladles of soup, making sure we get a good amount of onion in the bowl. Then in with our croutons, which will float on top. And finally, an ungodly amount of cheese. Classically, this would be Gruyere. I'm using both Gruyere and Swiss, or emmental if you prefer, just to make things interesting. Needless to say, get whole cheese and grate it yourself. This cheese will melt down quite a bit, so don't be afraid to pile it on. My wife likes hers with extra cheese, so I'm going a little crazy. And that's it. I'm going to pop these under the broiler for a few minutes to melt that cheese and warm the soup through. I'll see you at the table. And here we are, my take on French onion soup. Ideally, you'd serve this while the soup is still bubbling hot. It took a few minutes to set the shot up though, plus I had to take photos for thumbnails, of course, so I didn't quite get that. But I think it still looks pretty darn impressive. Let's take a closer look at this thing. We've got oozy cheese slathered on top of crunchy croutons, and hidden underneath, sweet onions in a rich, velvety, beefy broth. I started this video by calling this the king of soups, and I think you see why. Alright, let's do the flyby. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like, subscribe, share, and comment. It really helps spread the word about this channel, not to mention it motivates me to keep putting out more and hopefully better videos. I appreciate your support, and I'll see you next time. This soup is 50% cheese.